Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video I want to share something I didn't expect at all after switching hardware. Over the next few minutes I will show you 3 major reasons why I personally would not recommend saving money and buying Catwalk C2 Core Enhanced, and why in my experience it's absolutely worth spending a bit more and going for the C2 Plus instead. Of course, I'm speaking about enhanced versions because regular previous versions aren't available anymore. These aren't small differences, they directly affect immersion, comfort and even long-term use. So if you are thinking about getting a VR treadmill, this is something you definitely want to know before buying.
The first major issue I want to talk about is something that directly affects both immersion and long-term comfort. And that's the height of the rear moving frame on the Catwalk Core Enhanced. In practice, this means one thing: you will hit it. Especially in completely natural gameplay situations. For example, when you look up during fight, like when you are tracking a dragon above you, or when you are climbing or just looking up at the environment, your headset will collide with the rear frame. And it's not a rare occurrence. It happens repeatedly. Now this immediately breaks immersion. Because instead of being fully focused on the game, you suddenly become aware of physical obstacle behind you. But the bigger problem comes after that. Your body starts adapting. Without even realizing it, you become changing your posture to avoid hitting the frame again. Instead of standing upright and moving naturally, you start leaning forward, pushing your head and neck ahead of your body. Over time, this becomes your default way of moving. You are no longer walking naturally in VR, you are compensating for the hardware. And this is where things get even more concerning. Over the last 2 months, I started experiencing significant neck pain, and just to be clear, I've only been using the Core Enhanced for about 3 months, around 15 to 20 hours per week. The pain became frequent and sometimes even unbearable. Now here is the important part. I used the C2 Plus for 3 years before this, same type of usage, and I never had any serious neck issue. That difference is very hard to ignore. From my experience, it feels like your body is subconsciously trying to avoid those repeated impacts. So you lean forward more and more, putting your neck into an unnatural position. And when you combine that with a VR headset that can weigh close to kilogram, especially with forward weight distribution, you are constantly adding strain to your neck. Over time, that adds up. I obviously can't say this is the only cause, but based on my experience, the correlation is very clear, and considering I also spend 5 to 6 hours a day sitting for work, the last thing you want is another activity that reinforces poor posture. Now compare that to Catwalk C2 Plus. The rear frame is significantly shorter, which means there is simply no scenario where your headset collides with it. I've never hit it, not once. You can look up freely, move naturally, and stay fully immersed without constantly being reminded of real-world limitations. And most importantly, your body doesn't need to compensate. You just move the way you are supposed to. The second reason why I would never buy the Core Enhanced again comes down to the rear moving mechanism itself. On the C2 Plus, this system uses a cable. Over time, after about 1 to 2 years of heavy use, that cable can wear out or even snap. But here is the thing, even without it, the system still works. It's not ideal, but it is usable. You can think of it like having a bit of extra weight around your waist. After a while, you just get used to it. Now on the Core Enhanced, this cable was replaced with what looks like more robust solution, a metal strip. At first glance, it feels like an upgrade, but in reality, it turned out to be a downgrade. After just 2 months of use, the mechanism started making strange, very noticeable noises, especially when the belt was positioned somewhere between the waist and chest level, which is completely normal use case. The only way to stop the noise was to lower the position unnaturally. I kept using it like that for another month, and then the metal strip snapped completely. That's after roughly 3 months of use at around 15 to 20 hours per week. At that point, I had no choice but to physically cut it out just to keep using the treadmill. And even after that, the movement was no longer smooth. A part of the metal remained stuck inside the mechanism, which made vertical movement noticeably stiffer. It still works, but it's nowhere near as fluid as the C2+. Ironically, the only advantage now is that the belt stays in position better due to resistance. But that's clearly not how the system was meant to function. For me, this feels like a very poor design decision. This moving mechanism is a core part of the experience, and having it fail this quickly under normal use is a serious problem. When you combine that with everything else, this is another clear area where the C2 Plus is simply the better design. The third issue is something that doesn't seem obvious at first, but becomes extremely frustrating over time. And that's the alignment of the rear support structure. On the Core Enhanced, I had to repeatedly adjust the rear frame to keep it properly centered and straight. Compared to the C+, this is much harder to set up correctly. The problem is in the design. The core uses a multi-part structure that has to be aligned and tightened using multiple screws, in my case around 8 of them. And getting it perfectly straight is no simple process. I had to loosen and retighten everything multiple times, around 3 or 5 full adjustments, just to get it into a proper vertical position. And even then, it doesn't stay that way. With regular use, especially more intensive sessions, the screws slowly start losing over time. I found myself having to retighten everything roughly once every few months. And once that happens, the full rear structure starts drifting slightly to one side. It is never perfectly straight anymore. Now, compared to the C+, the rear structure is single-piece design. Even if screws loosen over time, it doesn't affect alignment in the same way. There is no need for constant readjustment, and it naturally stays centered. On the core, the segmented design introduces a weak point, the connection between those parts. And that's exactly where the instability comes from. For me, this turns into another unnecessary maintenance issue. Instead of just using the treadmill, you end up periodically fixing it to keep it working the way it should. And again, this is something that simply doesn't happen on the C2+. Now, to be fair, there are a couple of small advantages the Core Enhanced does have. These aren't deal breakers for me, but they are still worth mentioning. The first one is the extended vertical range of the rear moving frame. Because it's taller, it gives you more room to adjust your position. For taller users, especially around 1.9 meter and above, this actually could be a benefit. At my height, around 1.8 meter, it's already close to being noticeable. And I can see how, if I were taller, this wouldn't feel like a downside, but rather an advantage. It also allows for a deeper crouching position compared to the C2+. You can go lower and stay there more comfortably. That said, crouching for long periods in VR isn't exactly comfortable anyway, and most players won't use it that often. So while it's technically better in this area, it's not something I consider very important. The second advantage is actually something practical I noticed during everyday use. I usually rest my headset on the top bar of the rear frame when I am not playing. And on the Core Enhanced, that top position is significantly higher, roughly 30 or 35 centimeters higher. Because of that, the headset ends up much closer to my actual head position, which means when I start STEM VR or Pimax Play software, my height calibration stays much more consistent. I don't have to constantly readjust it. On the C2 Plus, the headset sits much lower when resting, sometimes 30 to 40 centimeters below your real standing height. And because of that, I often have to recalibrate my height before starting a game, which can get pretty annoying over time. So in this case, the Core Enhance actually offers a more convenient setup in terms of headset positioning and calibration.
Now, to be fair, I don't think these issues will affect everyone the same way. If you are only using a VR treadmill casually, maybe a few hours per week, these problems might not be as noticeable. But if you are playing more seriously 10 hours or more per week, then these design differences really start to matter. And in my case, they made a very noticeable differences. So hopefully this helps you make a better decision before spending your money. If you found this video useful, feel free to leave a like. It really helps support this channel. And as always, thank you for watching.